pt.1. Thank you, all of you that are online, for being here with us. Thank you to Reese Lynn from Nona Media and Juan Santos from MS2 here in Lake Nona. We're grateful for the opportunity to do this show here in a live setting, and for the members of the live audience that always are are loyal to us. And special thank you to these two fine young men that are the co-founders of a company called Source. How you guys doing today?
Doing well, doing
Doing
well.
good, doing
Thank you
good.
for having
Thank
us.
So we have Derek and Mason. Derek and Mason, if you can take a couple of minutes each and kind of tell us a little bit about yourselves and your story. I know your story because I was here when you guys, I was a mentor here at the Accelerator program when you guys were here
Yeah,
through the LEAD program. But
Yep.
why don't you, for the audience, give us a little bit of background on who you are and what is it that you do?
sure. So I'll just start off with the intro. So my name is Derek Saltzman. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Source. Um, Background is in material engineering and material science. Went to the local university, UCF, alma mater. Go Knights, charge on. Um, that's actually where I met my co-founder Mason.
Yep.
Funny enough, it was my very first roommate in college. So I came from an aerospace background where I like to build rockets. He came from a background with planes, and we met each other the first day. And he said, "Hey, let's go tackle the world."
Yep. And I'm Mason Mincy. I'm the COO and co-founder at Source. And like Derek said, we met back in freshman year of college. My background before university was in aerospace engineering, so like drone design, airplane design, stuff like that. So pretty good match, I would say, the first day at school. And both of us had a ton of experience in engineering before we met. So when we met at university, we just pretty much decided, let's tackle the world of UCF in the engineering program. And we just did a ton of projects together, and we can definitely get into the details of that entire story and how we got to this moment today. But to make a long story short, we've worked together for 8 years now.
Yeah.
So when they say you form a startup with your co-founder, you're married, that's pretty much the case, 100%.
Not only do we work together, we live together, we eat, sleep, breathe, everything we do together.
Exactly. And I would say what was really the catalyst of what we're doing today is we started a business during college, our probably freshman, sophomore years when we started it. And we didn't really know anything about business. All we saw was a sign at the university that said win $75,000 to start a business. And we're like, all right, we know engineering and we know how
Yeah.
to build products. Like, how hard can a business be? And very difficult. We didn't really know what we were doing, but I mean, nonetheless, we took a shot at it. We had a strong team of me, Derek, and a lot of our friends at the time. Our first business was manufacturing carbon fiber drone frames. So people who don't know or aren't familiar with carbon fiber, it's really strong, lightweight material used a lot in the automotive industry, aerospace industry, and we were making these drone chassis out of it.
Mhm.
And we got some good success with that business. And I would say the early days of school, grades went to the wayside a little bit because we were so focused on building the business. But it was a really great experience. We got to work with some really cool companies. We got to work with Red Bull. We got to work with a data center that worked pretty closely with Amazon. So it was a great first experience. But we could tell during the early days of university, it really wasn't what we wanted to work on long term. But I got our feet wet. And then Derek and I worked closely in research as well. So we had this first business. We were
Mhm.
doing decently well in sales, but we wanted to decide where could we take the business next. And at the time, we switched our degrees from aerospace engineering to material science, which is what our background is in today. When we made that pivot in our degree, we also made the pivot in the business
Business.
where we said, okay, well, we know this stuff around materials and chemistry now. Can we start from that level and create new fiber technologies, composite technologies? But we had to learn a bit more. So we worked very closely in research in a group called the Composite
Yeah,
Research
the
Group.
Advanced Composites Manufacturing Center at UCF
Yep.
under Dr. Jihua Gao. He was our original professor. And essentially, there, that's where we got our feet wet. That's where we got to learn all about kind of the more advanced side of material science.
Mhm.
So think of nanomaterial processing. So if you're a material science or chemist, you've heard of the word graphene before. It's kind of the most ubiquitous nanomaterial. It's always 10 years away. Still 10 years away today. But I mean, when we were working in these manufacturing settings in university, we noticed a kind of a key problem where one, to manufacture these types of really advanced nanomaterials is one, very expensive. Two, it was very costly and kind of toxic to do. So, I mean, if you saw us in the lab and we had gas masks, the bunny suit, the whole nine, if you were looking, and so that was one of the big two key factors that we noticed is like one, the cost to produce these types of materials is very expensive, and two, the overall environmental impact and just waste management is quite high. And that's what kind of set us on the new path of as we were kind of ramping down our first business, which was Soar Aerospace, and kind of pivoting into Source is what we would do today. And it kind of just led us to what we actually do today, where we're an advanced material, nanomaterial manufacturing company, where we take excess biomass such as seaweed or hemp. We have a proprietary process that allows us to functionalize and extract out specific biocomponents from the seaweed and hemp, such as cellulose, which is the most abundant biopolymer on the planet. It's found in pretty much every plant. It's in the cell wall of every plant. So, kind of going back to biology, where mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, we deal with the cell wall, and then essentially from these nanomaterials from nature, we take them and then we start incorporating them into a variety of market applications. So today we're working in an aerospace settings, marine settings, energy settings, and essentially the way that it works is you take these nanomaterials and you dose them into, if you've ever been on a boat, fiberglass boats, it makes the boats lighter, stronger. Airplanes, again, similar situation, makes them lighter and stronger. And even in energy settings right now, we're actually working with a couple companies where they're able to produce um, more energy efficient power generation utilizing lighter, stronger weight materials.
Well, that's quite a story there. So you guys, before you even, actually, before you even graduated, I remember you having, oh, you already were here
Yeah.
at the accelerator with lead, and you were already talking to investors. You were already made that pivot
Yep.
Hmm.
that you just talked about, right? And at the time, I remember you were being focused a lot on materials, from algae that
Yep.
could be derived from algae for clothing.
Yeah.
Because
Correct.
obviously the lead accelerator was going to focus on sports and
Hmm.
health and medicine, and sporting clothes is
Yeah.
kind of fits in that environment,
Hmm.
right? So how was that experience?
Ooh. I
Yeah.
mean, it was interesting because I think the upside of our experience at university, we got to work with the Blackstone Launchpad.
Mm.
So Blackstone has a philanthropic arm where they pretty much go into universities and they create curriculum for entrepreneurship. So we got our chops from that point. So we understood. I mean, we've done so many pitch competitions. We've pitched so many times. So we got a lot of experience from there.
Yeah.
But going through the lead program was definitely a step up
Mm.
that we weren't ready for at the time, but it's kind of just trial by fire, and it
Yeah.
definitely was fire. It just made us realize there's a certain level that you have to perform at when you start to raise money, and then the expectations change.
Hmm.
And I think it was a lot at once for our team, understanding what we were getting ourselves into and the business we really wanted to ultimately create. So, to your point, during the time, um, what we do today is not what we were doing when we first got into
Yeah.
Lead, like two
Correct.
years ago. We were trying to solve the issue around toxicity with clothing because all the clothing that we wear is made of plastic primarily, or it's some natural fiber that's coated with a ton of toxic compounds that directly lead to respiratory issues, kidney failure, etc. So that was kind of our in and lead. And during the program, I think the biggest challenge that we were trying to overcome as a team was how do we go through this program that's maybe like 4 months around that time and compartmentalize what we're trying to do as a business in those 4 months and try to gain traction. And I think at the time we were comparing ourselves to the startups here that were more focused on building, let's say, software startups, and we were building something with atoms, right? We were
Yeah.
using chemicals, and we actually built a setup, right in the back of
Performing.
Lead, to produce these materials, these fibers at the time from algae. And yeah, it was just a very interesting and challenging time because we had to really understand our business is not like most of the businesses here,
Hmm.
where we have to build things up, we have to manufacture things. So it was just it was a learning experience to understand what it took to build a venture backed business, the expectation with that, but also understanding like, hey, we're not like the other companies. We have to understand what are our key KPIs as a business that we really need to work on, not compare ourselves to other companies here.
Yeah, a lot of the times, especially in the world of startups, you hear a lot about SaaS, you hear a lot about software as a service, and just the next best app or the next best AI software. Those types of companies, you're dealing with bits, ones and zeros. We deal with atoms, and it's quite challenging because you're trying to force nature to do things that nature doesn't necessarily want to do sometimes, which makes it makes it a fun, challenging problem. And then too, I remember there was one time when we were building a wet spinning machine to spin algae fibers in a industrial space here, and I remember there was one day we put everything together and we had no idea if it was gonna explode, blow up. So we told everybody in the lab, like, "Hey, come look at this and hold up shields just in case if this doesn't work." And the part goes flying through that window, and if we don't break anything. So that was actually a really fun time just in the company's journey, seeing how you adapt and move. And I think one of the biggest things in a startup, and I think Bruce Lee said it best, is be water, flow like water, become the cup. And the main reason I say that is because you have to learn to adapt and adapt to the market, adapt to what your customers want, and adapt to what you're best suited, what your core competencies are as a company. At that time, we thought, yeah, algae fibers for sustainable clothing, replacing polyester, that was going to be the thing. And then as we started to get into the market and quickly realized the just the overall immense challenge that it is, as well as just the demand, we realized that, well, maybe this isn't the best first market to start in. And hence the analogy to Bruce Lee and the be like water is we noticed like, oh, there's another area of just being a chemical company, of an algae based chemical company where we produce these functionalized nanomaterials, was a lot more advantageous for us rather than trying to be a finished textile good.
Just for the audience, real quick, how old are you guys?
27.
26.
26 and 27. They talk like veteran veteran entrepreneurs, which in some ways you are, right? Because you started so young.
Yeah.
No, it's very interesting what you're saying, because even within the domain of building things, so let's forget for a moment about software companies, and you look at hardware companies. Even in that domain, you're still different, because you're not just putting something together that's going to be a box. You need a wet lab,
Hmm.
right? Which is a very specific environment to be able to run very specific tests on their specific, um, let's call it atmospheric
Yeah.
conditions, if you
Correct.
will,
Yeah.
with particles per million or per billion or whatever, right? So it's it's still a departure
Hmm.
Hmm.
from a standard hardware company.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you did you experience any level of success? I was personally excited when you guys were here, because I agree with you that the the world of clothing needs to evolve.
Hmm.
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, you guys were looking for ways to create them, take the algae from the ocean,
Hmm.
right? Do what you do, your secret sauce,
Yep.
and out comes a material that can go into a manufacturing facility that is today making t-shirts or
Yep.
pants or whatever, and they will have to do either minimal or no change to their process to use your materials versus cotton or whatever else bamboo they may be using, right? Can you go over that real quick before we get into how you pivoted? Because I
Yeah.
think that, although I think it's wise that you took a step back, and because it is a challenging market.
Oh
It
yeah.
is a very margin driven
Very much
market,
so.
Yes.
right? You have a lot of competition from all over the world, but it's still a market that someday someone should tackle. Hopefully, you guys, right? So, talk a little bit more about that, in how much you went through that process of not just t-shirts, but also, I remember you guys were talking about um, clothing for firemen,
Yep.
firefighters,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things we realized kind of going through the gambit of trying to tackle the textile industry is one, textile industry is built on supply chain. I mean, the crazy part is, I mean, we talk to some of the biggest companies. I mean, Ralph Lauren. I mean, you go down the list, Reebok, Nike, like they're gigantic companies, and you quickly realize that the design hubs are here in the United States. The manufacturing is done in either India, Bangladesh, or China. Then that manufactured components get shipped all across the sea to maybe somewhere in Turkey or Thailand, where then they're doing cutting and sewing, and then they're shipping all those garments again to another facility to go through final quality control, and they're shipping it one more time to finally get to the retailer where you're going to your Macy's or H&M or wherever you're going to actually buy your products. And understanding that kind of dysfunctional supply chain was really interesting. And it also just told us the difficulty of trying to innovate in that space, because you have to get a lot of people, a lot of different groups need to agree, because you can get the buy-in from the brand. Let's just say like a Nike, for example. You can get a buy-in from a Nike, but then you have to go through their tier one to two suppliers. And you quickly realize that the textile mill that's been around for 100 plus years is, they've been working with cotton or they've been working with synthetics, and they're like, what is this algae material? We don't want to touch this algae material. It just makes it very difficult for new innovation to be sparked in that industry. But overall, I will say that there is an avid push right now from the industry to change, just because they're getting looked at under more of a fine tooth comb with a more of a stronger microscope, as you would say. So there is an active, I would say, push to change, but truthfully, it's going to come from consumers. The brands listen to the consumers, and at the end of the day, if you're a consumer and you go to again a Macy's and you see a T-shirt that is $20 and you see a T-shirt that is $30, they're the exact same T-shirt. One was made slightly more sustainably with less water or is a new material. The sad truth is majority of customers will go with the cheaper product, and that's still the problem that today. And if that exists in the world that we exist in right now, or that continues to exist, the brands aren't going to switch. They're not going to do anything until there's either a serious regulation to do so, which is coming down the pipeline, but there's always loopholes around those. And the second part is actually the consumer. The consumer is the biggest deciding factor. I mean, you choose with your dollars. And I think that is starting to happen, because you're seeing companies like Allbirds over the past 5 to 10 years skyrocket in their development compared to the Nikes and Lululemons of the world.
Yeah, and I think to add to that as well is I think we've realized, and I feel as a startup, you want to accept the world as it is, not what you believe it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And if you operate in this realm of you think it should be like this and you're operating in that realm, then you may not find the success that you would have if you just accept the world as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really important for customers you want to tackle as a startup, and this is something we learned, is it's not only about the customer saying, hey, we have this problem, we want this algae based fiber because it helps us because of the lower water use, whatever that may be, replace cotton. But also it's the ecosystem that exists is super important and pivotal in order for you to actually penetrate the market. So for instance, in the fashion industry, to Derek's point, when we look at, let's say, the top brands in the space, right? They're all set up this way. They have an innovation team,
Mm-hmm.
right? This innovation team, there's someone hired to say, hey, go find the most innovative stuff in the market, bring that to us, and let's try to commercialize this. And like Derek mentioned, we have worked with these large apparel brands and we met the innovation team. The problem with the large apparel brands is the innovation team is made up of maybe 5 to 10 people, as opposed to an innovation team in, let's say, the automotive industry. You're looking at a team of engineers of 200, 300 plus
Yeah.
people. And the problem with that is when you have such a small innovation team, their job is to find these new materials. But if they can't get the buy in from the suppliers to integrate it, then their job is always to find innovation. And they're doing their job, right? They're searching for innovation. But actual integration of that,
Mhm.
that's not necessarily their job. And from the supplier's point of view, what was very interesting back in COVID, we had an overabundance of
Mm-hmm.
supply in the textile industry because spending was cut. And the spending that got cut the largest was discretionary spending,
Mhm.
i.e., clothing, right? Except in the luxury category, that actually did pretty well, surprisingly. But it's discretionary spending. So what happened is the textile industry and all the suppliers in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Taiwan, they had an overabundance of textile supply that wasn't being purchased. That was intended to be purchased, but it wasn't. So now, right, this is all like macroeconomics at this point because now they have a ton of supply that they need to push. And then they're being told by the innovation team at Nike, hey, we want to introduce this new recycled textile or this new bio based textile. the suppliers are like, no, we have all this inventory that we need to push. We're sitting on this sunk cost. So
Yep.
it's such a high friction environment for them to integrate the solution because they're sitting on all this inventory. So all that to say is the ecosystem is so important when considering the market that you're trying to penetrate. And we learned that
Yeah.
firsthand that the ecosystem just wasn't as strong as it needed to be as a beachhead market,
Yeah.
right? That's not to say this isn't an opportunity in the future, but startup is all cash flow, how much money you got
Yeah.
to the end of the year, and you need to make decisions where you can capitalize and grow quickly, as opposed to a market that you can't penetrate for many years.
And that even applies even if it's not. You mentioned the example of 20 versus 30 for a shirt, for example. Under those conditions, even if your product is cheaper, they still have that issue of that sunk cost.
Yeah.
They still have all that product that they have to push. They still have to recover
Yeah.
some of that somehow, right? So even if you are able to to provide something that um, reduces the bottom line for them, so their margins grow, you're still fighting an uphill battle.
Oh yeah, and not only that, I mean, the funny thing is for natural materials or new more natural materials that are truly better for the environment and or better for the end consumer is there's a different, let's say, technical or rubric that they evaluation. There's a different evaluation criteria. So they want the new material to be cost competitive. They want it to be outperforming the originals. They want it like there's a long laundry list of all these amazing things they want this new material to do, and people don't realize plastics have been around for 70 plus years. We've had amazing engineers over the past 70 years develop it. The Rutherfords, the developers of nylon. I mean, these have been innovations that have been built upon and incrementally increased in efficiency by 1% every single year. So plastics today as an engineering material are it's an amazing feat of engineering. It's just the fact those engineers many years ago couldn't see the future of how consumerism would change and how these materials wouldn't degrade in the environment. Um, so from that, it's a much more difficult to integrate a new technology because the brands do not want to sacrifice on their brand image by introducing a new product that isn't the highest performing best product on the market. If there's just a slight bit of imperfection or inefficiency, or it doesn't meet the exact same specs,
Mm.
even more, then they're not going to put it on the shelf, and that's what hinders a lot of innovation in this space because we've worked like for instance, about a year and a half ago, we went to an event called Biofabricate, which is pretty much the world's largest biomaterials conference, where you have the largest manufacturers, again, the Nikes, the Lululemons, the biggest companies in the world, and you have all the innovative startups that are working on really crazy stuff. I mean, people that are sucking CO2 and turning that into either a polyester material, or people that are using mushrooms to make leathers, or using all these new amazing natural materials, but one of the biggest bottlenecks is the brands are really afraid to put their name behind it because they don't want to go to market and it just flops. So they would need such a long, stringent amount of testing to get something into the market that a lot of these startups just end up dying before they can ever see that kind of come final crossing the finish line, if you will.